We are here today with our partners, the African Union Commission, the African Union Renewable Energy Commission, Sustainable Energy for All, and the World Resources Institute, launching the Africa Energy Dialogues platform. The Africa Energy Dialogue platform arises from conversations that these partners and others have been having about the transition into all the movement into a cleaner energy future for Africa. Knowing that, of course, last year, the African Union published the African Common Position on the just and equitable energy transition and energy access. And that position says that Africa will have to use all forms of energy that it has to go into this clean energy future. In the meantime, using everything that it has. Now, our perspective into that is that, and let me use an anecdote from somebody from this region in the past who said that humankind did not come out of the Stone Age because they ran out of stones, but because they found a better way. So the question is, we have a common position. When it comes to each country, what is a better way? Because no two countries are necessarily the same. And I think this is where the idea from the ECA perspective is, how can we inform our countries to have a better way as to what energy future they have? An energy future that capitalizes on the renewable energy potential that they have, an energy future that does not lock itself into unnecessary investments in fossil fuels that will become stranded, but an energy future that capitalizes on using what Africa has to go towards this clean energy future. And that is where we are. We need to provide, of course, as ECA, we support our member states with think tank, convening, and advisory services. We are doing this as part of our think tank and convening role, and we will be convening on many occasions to get good perspectives, to look into what does it take now for Africa to get this better way going into the future, designing the energy future that it needs to industrialize. It needs to close the energy deficit gap that we have at the moment. About 600 people without access to electricity, and so on. Over 80% of people cooking with biomass. How does each country go forward in this process? And I think this is what the platform is going to help our countries. Not to tell them what to do, but to bring the nuances that are needed to inform them to find a better way for the energy future that will be most appropriate for them. Indeed. So again, it is for African countries to decide what they want to do. And it is for African countries to build the partnerships that are needed in that process. It is not for somebody else, for developed countries or anybody else, to tell African countries what they have to do. Now, how can we support these countries? We can support them by being able to bring the data, the analysis, and the kind of conversation that are needed to inform that way forward. But of course, in this whole process, the main thing is investment. Whichever way they decide to go, we need investments. And those investments are very, very small at the moment. And the question is, where would they come from? Because we know public resources are very, very small. So we need to find out, how do you leverage this limited amount of public resources to mobilize the huge investments that are needed. Just electricity alone, if we really need to make a big move, a big step increment into the provision of electricity in Africa, we need investments of about 500 billion in the next 7 years or so by 2030, over 2 trillion by 2050. That is a lot of money which the public doesn't have. But we have climate change, and climate change impacts that are adversely affecting the countries. And of course, climate change and development are two sides of the same coin, right? We are here today because of the development model that we used, and therefore going forward would depend on which development models we calibrate. And that is why the energy future of Africa is also very important, and so that countries can choose the right energy future that address the challenges of climate change and provide investment opportunities, right? So clean energy in Africa is very important. We can help to mobilize the monies, but we also need to think about new innovations on how that is done. In fact, through this platform, through this dialogue platform, we already had one event where we're speaking to domestic resource on the issue of domestic resources. We brought people from pension funds. Where are we investing our pension funds, right? What are we investing our sovereign wealth funds? This could be some of the things that we can look into. We spoke to some of the pension people managing pension funds. We need to now bring them together with policymakers to see how can the policy environment be made in such a way that more of those funds are invested in Africa instead of being invested in treasury bonds in other economies and so on. And then those resources coming back to Africa at a very high cost of capital rate. So this is a lot of things that we need to discuss and be able to get the policy makers and the people who can be able to mobilize money in the private sector to work together to see how we can drive this agenda going forward. The main message is that, yes, there are huge opportunities for Africa to go forward, to define its energy future and define it in a way that, starting from a low base, define it without having to make the mistakes that other regions have made, but it needs a really, really strong approach to working together. It needs our own resources to drive this process, and of course also needs to find a way where we can get more private sector investments, our private sector, our capital, but also foreign direct investment into this process. And if we can do that urgently, that would be very important, because we cannot continue to close the development goals with the kind of energy access that we have at the moment. So there's a lot of urgency at the speed and the scale that is needed. In fact, and that is even the reason why we at the ECA, we also established the SDG 7 initiative that was able to facilitate a local currency, a green bond in South Africa. And then the question is, can we also do the same in other countries to do local currency? Because the issue of local currency bonds is very important, because countries or projects are borrowing money in foreign currency and generating revenue in local currency, and because of exchange rates and so on, there are also kinds of challenges. And we feel that we need to come up with new innovations on how we can support countries to really mobilize this investment, particularly in terms of local currency, to invest in closing this gap. But we are in midway with the SDGs, and as we all know, we are not getting there. Without energy, it will even be worse. So we really need to step up the ambition. We need to double down on our efforts on addressing the energy issue, so that we can also facilitate or catalyze the other SDGs. Yeah.